What happens when the man you ridicule for being too frugal uses your own spending habits against you? I thought mocking my husband's obsession with saving money made me clever, even superior. But the day he walked out with legal documents in hand, I realized his discipline had built freedom, while I had only chained myself to debt. My name is Isolde Crane, I'm 33, and everyone acts like I ruined my own life. I don't see it that way. Marcus, my husband, was obsessed with saving every penny, acting like money was only meant for emergencies or some far-off retirement. He tracked every expense, cut coupons, and bragged about his spreadsheets. I used to tell him he was living like a poor man when he could at least try to enjoy the present. I thought mocking his stinginess made me clever, even powerful. When my sister Marla told me I deserved someone exciting, someone who wasn't afraid to spend, I believed her. At work, Victor, my coworker, showered me with attention and never hesitated to pick up a bill. I compared him to Marcus constantly, saying Marcus was boring and Victor knew how to live. Marcus never shouted, never fought back. He just went quiet, and I took that as proof he had no courage. What I didn't realize was that his silence wasn't surrender, it was planning. It began at one of those Sunday dinners Marcus's parents insisted on hosting. Linda and Paul always invited us over, saying family meals kept everyone grounded. Their dining room was formal, the kind with stiff-backed chairs and a chandelier that flickered too brightly over polished silver. I hated it. It felt like a courtroom, not a home. Marcus thrived there, though. He'd sit tall, polite, answering every question about his work with that same calm voice that made me want to scream. He'd talk about budgets, clients, and retirement accounts like anyone actually cared. That night, I decided I wasn't going to let him get away with making me invisible again. I wore a dress that caught eyes, not because I wanted his approval, but because I wanted to remind everyone else that I was still young and desirable. Marla, my younger sister, tagged along as usual, ready to whisper encouragement in my ear. She thought Marcus was boring too. She always told me I deserved better. Dinner began with Linda fussing over the roast, Peter pouring wine, and Marcus helping the kids with their plates. He always did that, cutting Claire's chicken, making sure Jonah had vegetables. Everyone looked at him like he was some kind of saint. I rolled my eyes. I told myself he was performing, trying to look good in front of his parents. When conversation turned to Marcus's latest work project, he went on about how he had helped a client save thousands by restructuring their budget. Linda beamed, saying how proud she was of him. That was my cue. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. I said Marcus was so obsessed with saving money that he probably kept track of how many breaths we took to see if it cost too much. The table went quiet for a moment. Marla laughed out loud, clapping me on the shoulder, saying I was right. Paul frowned, and Linda's lips tightened. I didn't stop there. I said I didn't understand why Marcus acted like enjoying life was a crime. I told everyone that Victor, my coworker, had just treated me and Marla to lunch last week. No spreadsheets, no coupons, no guilt. I made a point of saying his generosity made life feel fun, something Marcus could never understand. Linda set her fork down with a sharp clink. She asked me if I thought it was respectful to compare my husband to another man in front of the family. I shrugged and said I was just being honest, that maybe Marcus needed to hear it. I added that sometimes I felt like I was married to a calculator, not a person. Marla smirked and said at least Victor knew how to treat a woman. Marcus didn't say a word. He kept his eyes on his plate, cutting Jonah's food, sipping his water. His silence irritated me more than anything. I wanted him to react, to prove me wrong, to show he cared. Instead, he sat calm and still, which made me push harder. I told the table that I sometimes wondered how different my life would be if I'd chosen someone with more excitement, someone who wasn't afraid to enjoy himself. I said Marcus acted like every dollar was a threat, like the world would end if we spent money on something fun. Paul finally spoke, his voice low but firm. He told me there was nothing shameful about being careful, that Marcus's habits gave us security. He said too many families fell apart because of debt, but Marcus was making sure we would never face that. I laughed in his face. I told him security was just another word for boredom, and that people who saved too much ended up with full accounts but empty lives. Linda's eyes burned into me. She told me sharply that I was mocking values that built this family. She said if I couldn't appreciate stability, I should at least stop humiliating Marcus in front of his children. Claire looked up from her plate with wide eyes, asking if Mommy was mad at Daddy. I smiled at her and said Mommy was just teasing. Linda cut me off, saying children saw more than I realized, that I was planting poison in their hearts. Marla snorted and said everyone was overreacting. She told Linda that I was just being real, that not everyone wanted to live like misers. Linda snapped back that at least misers weren't drowning in credit cards. That hit me harder than I expected, because she was right. I had balances hidden away, ones Marcus hadn't noticed yet. I shoved the thought aside and laughed louder, claiming Marcus was so obsessed with savings that he forgot to live. Ethan still didn't speak. He wiped Jonah's mouth gently, refilled Claire's glass, and carried on as though I hadn't said a word. That silence was unbearable. I wanted him to slam his hand down, to defend himself, to finally fight me. Instead, he gave me nothing. After dinner, Linda pulled Marcus aside in the kitchen. She hugged him tightly, whispering in his ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw his shoulders stiffen, then nod. Paul patted his back, giving me a cold look as he passed. No one said goodbye to me directly. Elise nudged me on the way out, whispering that Marcus was just too spineless to fight, and that was why I had to provoke him. In the car ride home, the silence was suffocating. I accused Marcus of sulking, of letting his mother run his life. He kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. He said nothing. That quiet made me furious. I told him he should thank me for bringing life into this marriage, that without me, it would be nothing but receipts and bank accounts. He didn't even blink. When we got home, the kids ran upstairs. Marcus followed, tucking them in, reading Jonah a story. His voice floated down the hall, calm and even. I poured myself a glass of wine, seething. My phone buzzed. It was Victor. "You must look amazing tonight. Wish I were there instead of him." I smiled, my anger softening into something like triumph. Marcus walked past me on his way back downstairs. He glanced once at my phone, then back at me. His eyes gave nothing away. He picked up a book from the shelf, sat on the couch, and began reading as though I didn't exist. That silence pressed against my chest. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sipped my wine, convinced that his calmness was proof of weakness. I told myself he wouldn't act, couldn't act. Elise's words echoed in my head. Men like Marcus never did anything but hide behind their ledgers. What I didn't realize was that Marcus's silence wasn't surrender. It was patience, and that night, without me knowing, he had already started collecting proof. The second blow came a week later when Marcus and I went out with a group of friends to an upscale restaurant downtown. It wasn't somewhere we usually went. Marcus hated places where the bill was padded by ambiance. But a friend's birthday gave me the perfect excuse. I dressed to impress, wearing heels that clicked loudly against the tiled floor, and a dress I'd bought on credit. Marcus wore his usual button-up, neat but plain. Just looking at him beside me, I felt restless, like I was dragging dead weight into a room full of light. The table filled with laughter and chatter as everyone ordered starters and drinks. When the waiter came to us, I asked for the most expensive bottle of wine on the list. Marcus quietly said he'd prefer something simpler. His tone was polite, but I felt exposed, like he had just embarrassed me in front of everyone. I raised my voice, laughing that he was always trying to pinch pennies, even at someone else's celebration. The table went a little quiet before picking up again, but I saw the looks. I thrived on them. When the waiter left, I leaned in and said loudly that some people didn't know how to enjoy life. I told everyone Victor, my co-worker, though I called him a friend from work, had surprised me with champagne just last week. He hadn't worried about the price, hadn't made me feel guilty. Everyone chuckled politely, But Marcus only smiled faintly and continued cutting his steak. That calmness made me push harder. I turned to the friends celebrating and joked that if Marcus were planning the party, we'd all be eating fast food and drinking tap water. People laughed nervously. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. His silence felt like a dare. Victor arrived later. Yes, I had told him where we'd be. He strolled in with his usual confidence, wearing a tailored jacket and carrying himself like the room belonged to him. He spotted me instantly, gave a little wave, and joined the bar. My heart raced at the attention. When he sent a round of drinks to our table, I smiled too brightly, thanking him, letting everyone see the exchange. Marcus noticed, of course. His eyes flicked from the drinks to Victor, then back to me. He didn't ask, didn't accuse. He just continued his meal, calm as ever. That composure infuriated me. I leaned across the table, telling everyone how generous Victor always was, how he knew how to make life exciting. Later, when dessert arrived, Marcus quietly excused himself. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and said he had to leave early. No one stopped him, though the air around the table thickened. I laughed it off, saying he was too tired to keep up with the rest of us. Victor smirked from across the room, and I let him walk me out later, proud of myself for being admired, while Marcus sulked away. But as Victor and I stood outside under the glow of streetlights, I caught sight of something across the street. A figure leaning against a car. My heart skipped. It was Marcus. He was holding up his phone, the screen glowing faintly, aimed directly at us. My breath caught. Victor didn't notice. He was busy telling me we should go out again soon. I nodded, distracted, my pulse racing. When I finally got home, Marcus was already there. He sat on the couch, papers spread across his lap, a pen in his hand. He looked up briefly when I walked in, then went back to writing. I asked why he left without saying anything. He said he had things to do. His voice was steady, without bite. I accused him of sulking, of being jealous. He didn't respond. I poured myself a glass of wine, scrolling through my phone. Victor had texted, "He doesn't deserve you. Everyone can see it." My lips curled into a smile. I read the message out loud, half expecting Marcus to react. He didn't. He turned another page of his paperwork and carried on as though I hadn't spoken. The silence between us grew heavier each day after that. At home, he was attentive to the kids, playing with Claire, helping Jonah with math homework. With me, he was distant but polite. He answered questions without emotion, kept his tone even, and never raised his voice. The calmness was worse than anger. I wanted a fight, something to prove he still cared. Instead, I got quiet nods and late nights where he sat at his desk, working on something he never explained. I told Marla about it. She laughed and said Marcus was just too scared to lose me, that he would never dare act on his own. She told me to enjoy Victor's attention and not let Marcus's sulking control me. Her words made me feel strong again, but deep down, a gnawing fear had begun. The image of Marcus standing across the street, phone raised, wouldn't leave me. At work, whispers started. A co-worker mentioned seeing me with Victor. Another asked carefully if Marcus knew. I brushed them off, laughing, saying Marcus didn't care. But their stares lingered, and my stomach twisted each time. One night, after I came home late from drinks with Victor, Marcus was waiting in the living room. He didn't ask where I'd been. He didn't accuse me. He simply stood, kissed Claire and Jonah goodnight, and went upstairs without a word. On the table, I noticed his phone charging. The screen lit up briefly, and I caught a glimpse of a folder labeled Receipts. My blood ran cold. For years, I had mocked his obsession with numbers and records, but now I realized his meticulousness might not be limited to spreadsheets. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was collection. And every photo, every message, every careless laugh with Victor might already be neatly stored away, waiting. I told myself I was still in control, but that night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I couldn't shake the fear. Marcus wasn't weak, he was preparing. The breaking point came when we hosted dinner at our own house. Marcus had agreed to invite both sides of the family, his parents, my parents, and Marla. It should have been a normal gathering, but by then I felt cornered. Whispers at work, Marcus's heavy silence, and Victor pulling away slightly after realizing how complicated things were. It all made me restless. I told myself the only way to take back control was to put Marcus on the spot, to show everyone he wasn't the saint they thought he was. I dressed deliberately that night, a bright red dress that hugged me tight. Marla whistled when she saw me, saying I looked like I was about to go out dancing rather than serve dinner. I smirked and said, maybe I'd find a better partner after dessert. She laughed, egging me on. Marcus didn't comment at all. He moved around the kitchen, calm, chopping vegetables with steady hands, setting out wine glasses with precise care. That silence felt like an insult. The evening started quietly enough. Claire and Jonah carried plates to the table while Marcus carved the roast. My parents complimented the food, Paul asked Jonah about school, and Linda sat stiffly across from me, watching my every move. I could feel her eyes like knives. Halfway through the meal, I decided to strike. I raised my glass and said it was funny how Marcus always preached about saving money. But then here we were, finally eating a decent meal because I had planned it. The room went quiet. I smirked, sipping my wine. Marla laughed out loud, saying Marcus would have served boiled potatoes if left to his own devices. I pushed further. I said sometimes I felt like I was married to a miser instead of a man. I joked that Marcus probably had a spreadsheet calculating the cost of each bite of food on our plates. My parents shifted uncomfortably. Paul's jaw tightened. Linda slammed her fork down, telling me sharply to stop humiliating her son in front of his children. That was when I mentioned Victor. I didn't say his name, but I said I had friends who knew how to enjoy life, who weren't afraid to pick up a check, who understood that money was for living, not hoarding. Marla smirked and said at least some men had style. Claire looked at me, confused, asking what I meant. I smiled at her, brushing it off, saying Mommy was just teasing again. Linda's voice rose. She told me children understood more than I thought, that I was teaching them disrespect. I snapped back that at least I was teaching them to live a little, not to grow up afraid of spending a cent. My father cleared his throat and muttered that I was going too far, but I ignored him. I leaned back in my chair and said Marcus never fought for me, that he let me do all the talking, all the living. I told everyone maybe I should have chosen someone who made life exciting, someone who didn't hide behind ledgers. The air went still. Marla laughed weakly, but even she looked uneasy. Marcus set his knife down. He stood, calm, collected, his face unreadable. Without a word, he walked to the counter and picked up a thick envelope. He returned to the table, placed it in front of me, and said I could open it later. His voice was steady, almost too steady. Then he turned and walked upstairs, leaving his dinner half-eaten. The silence that followed was suffocating. Linda looked triumphant, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She told me in a low, sharp voice that I had finally pushed too far. Paul gave me a long, disappointed stare before following Marcus upstairs. My parents sat frozen, my mother looking pale, my father rubbing his forehead. Marla reached for the envelope, laughing nervously, saying Marcus was bluffing, that it was just another one of his scare tactics. She told me not to worry, not to give him the satisfaction of opening it, but my hands were trembling. I couldn't look away from that envelope. It sat there like a threat, like a weapon. I wanted to tear it open, to prove it was empty, but something in the way Marcus had walked out told me it wasn't. After everyone left, the house felt unbearably quiet. Claire and Jonah were asleep, their doors closed upstairs. I poured myself another glass of wine and paced the kitchen, the envelope still on the table. I told myself it was nothing, that Marcus wouldn't dare take action. I laughed out loud, calling him pathetic, but the sound was hollow. I carried the envelope upstairs, set it on my nightstand, and slid into bed. Marcus was already under the covers, his back turned to me, his breathing steady. I stared at the envelope in the dim light, Elise's words echoing in my head, that Marcus was too weak to ever act. But for the first time, I wasn't sure. His silence no longer felt like fear. It felt like planning. And whatever was inside that envelope was proof that Marcus had been preparing all along. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope in front of me. Marcus had already left for work, the kids were at school, and the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My coffee had gone cold. I stared at the envelope for what felt like hours before finally ripping it open. What spilled out wasn't a letter or some passive-aggressive note. It was paperwork. Legal paperwork, custody petitions, financial separation documents, bank statements. My heart thudded as I flipped page after page, each one worse than the last. His lawyer's letterhead glared back at me. Marcus had already met with professionals. He wasn't bluffing. I shoved the papers back into the envelope and told myself it was just scare tactics. He wouldn't dare follow through. He needed me. And besides, everyone knew I was the one who made life fun. Without me, he was just a dull accountant. But when I went to the grocery store later, my card declined at the register. I tried again, then again. Same result. The cashier gave me that awkward, pitying smile. The people in line shuffled impatiently. I grabbed what little cash I had and left half the items behind. In the car, I opened the banking app on my phone. The joint account was locked, frozen. Panic surged through me. Marcus had cut me off. I called him over and over. No answer. I left voicemails accusing him of cruelty, telling him he was ruining the children's lives, begging him to pick up. Nothing. I texted him, "You can't do this. You're destroying us." Silence. I called Marla. She laughed at first, told me he was just trying to scare me, that I shouldn't give him the satisfaction of panicking. She said I should lean harder into Victor, remind Marcus I wasn't desperate. Her confidence steadied me for a moment. But when I reached out to Victor later, he was different, distant. He said he didn't want to get involved in married people problems. When I hinted I might need help covering bills until Marcus calmed down, he said flatly he couldn't. His excuses tumbled out. School loans, other obligations. Then he stopped answering my calls altogether. That evening, Marcus came home carrying groceries, calm as ever. He kissed Claire and Jonah on their heads, asked about their day, helped with their homework. He moved around the kitchen with quiet confidence, ignoring me completely. When the kids went upstairs, I cornered him. I slammed the envelope on the counter and demanded to know what he was doing. He looked at me with those steady eyes and said he wasn't punishing me. He was protecting the children. His voice was so calm it cut deeper than shouting. I laughed bitterly, told him he was overreacting, that Liam, or Victor, as I nearly slipped, was just a friend. He didn't raise his voice. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and showed me photo after photo. Me and Victor at the cafe. Me laughing too close at the restaurant. Victor's car parked outside Marla's apartment late at night. Each one time-stamped. Each one undeniable. My stomach dropped. I accused him of stalking me, of twisting harmless moments into something sinister. He shook his head slowly and swiped again. Messages appeared, my own words, printed on the screen. Jokes about Marcus being boring, comments to Marla about field testing his friends. Even that cruel line I'd written about maybe Victor being a better partner. My throat closed. I tried to laugh it off, said it was all out of context, just banter. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and said the court would see it differently. Then he turned and walked upstairs, leaving me trembling in the kitchen. The phone rang an hour later. It was Linda. Her voice was sharp but triumphant. She said she was proud of her son for finally standing up for himself. She told me I had mocked him for too long, drained him for too long, and now he was protecting what mattered. I hung up on her, but her words echoed in my head. Later, my mother called. Her voice was softer, almost broken. She said she couldn't defend me anymore, not after everything. She reminded me Claire and Jonah needed stability, not drama. She said maybe Marcus was the only one thinking clearly. I shouted back that she was taking his side, accused her of betrayal. She went quiet, and I ended the call with my hands shaking. I sat alone in the kitchen, The paperwork spread across the table, my phone buzzing with unanswered calls. Victor had stopped replying. Marla kept telling me Marcus was bluffing, but even she didn't sound certain anymore. Marcus was upstairs, reading to the children, his voice calm and steady. For years, I had mistaken that calm for weakness, but now I could see the truth. His silence had been patience. His frugality, his obsession with numbers and records, had been preparation. And he had been building something stronger than I ever imagined. Something legal, something final. And it was about to leave me with nothing. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and paper, the kind of sterile air that makes you feel small. I walked in with my head high, heels clicking against the floor, telling myself Marcus wouldn't go through with this. I wore my best dress, styled my hair, put on makeup that screamed control. I told myself appearances could still win the room. But when I saw Marcus already seated with his lawyer, calm and perfectly composed, my stomach twisted. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't afraid. He looked like a man who had already won. The mediator laid folders across the table. I opened mine with shaking hands. Evidence. That single word made my chest tighten. There were photos. Me and Victor at the cafe, laughing too close at the bar, his car parked outside Marla's apartment late at night. Every image was time-stamped, neat, undeniable. I wanted to argue they were innocent moments, but even I knew no one in that room would believe me. Then came the messages. My own words, printed in black and white, lines where I called Marcus boring, where I bragged to Marla about Victor taking me out, where I mocked Marcus's savings obsession, writing that maybe another man could provide better. My throat closed. I tried to argue. They were just jokes, private words taken out of context. Marcus's lawyer said context didn't matter. The words stood for themselves. The financial records followed. Pages and pages of bank statements, transfers to Victor labeled as help and loans. Payments for dinners, clothes and outings, all traced back to our joint account. The lawyer pointed to the totals, saying I had drained household funds for personal indulgences. I stammered that Marcus's stinginess forced me to act, that I only wanted to live a little. My excuses sounded pathetic in the quiet room. Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice was steady, clear, almost too calm. He said this wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting Claire and Jonah. He said they needed a stable home, one free from reckless spending and public humiliation. He said money was not meant for vanity, but for security, and that he would not let them grow up watching their mother gamble their future away. His words cut sharper than shouting ever could. I looked around the room for support. Linda sat behind him, her eyes fierce but proud. Paul sat beside her, his face calm but resolute. On my side, Marla scrolled on her phone, sighing dramatically every time Marcus spoke, but even she wouldn't meet my eyes. My parents sat further back. My mother's face was pale, her lips tight. My father kept staring at the floor. No one defended me, not one. The mediator's decision came quicker than I imagined. Majority custody to Marcus. My time with the children restricted to supervised visitation until further review. Financial assets secured under his control. My access to accounts revoked, limited only to child-related expenses. And worst of all, debts from my spending tied directly to me. The words rang in my ears like a sentence. Supervised, revoked, debt. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I tried to insist Marcus was punishing me, that his obsession with money was the real problem. The mediator shook her head, saying the record spoke clearly. When the session ended, Marcus gathered his papers neatly, slid them into his folder, and stood. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He walked out of the room, where Claire and Jonah were waiting with his parents. They ran to him, hugging his legs. He smiled down at them, taking their hands, walking away without a word in my direction. I stayed seated, frozen, the paperwork heavy in my lap. My phone buzzed in my bag. My heart leapt. Maybe Victor, maybe Marla with some plan, maybe anyone. I opened the message. It was from Victor. This is too messy. Don't contact me again. Short, final. The room emptied, leaving me alone with silence. For years, I had mocked Marcus's frugality, calling it weakness. I had told myself his silence meant surrender. But now, sitting there with my debts stacked against me and my children walking out with him, I finally understood. His silence had been his weapon. His patience, his saving, his careful planning, they were the foundation of his revenge. And now he had everything. The children, the finances, the dignity. Me? I was left with nothing but the weight of my own words, my own debts, and the memory of how calmly he walked away. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching. Ching, 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 ching.